Mark, why should people care about storytelling?
Well, if you care about making an impact and connecting with people on any sort of level, whether that's for your business or for your reach, then you need to pay attention to the native language of the humans, which are stories. In fact, if you look at over 400,000 years ago, the way that humans evolved around fire and cooking and extended their days into the night, they used to share stories. Now, I never know how people know this, anthropologists, but it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because you're probably sitting there around the fire and Steve is sharing a story about like, don't eat that berry, it's going to give you the shits, or something like that. Or like, don't, be careful over there, there's some predators sort of going to catch you, or this is how you catch your prey, or this is how you find shelter. So sharing stories was actually part of a survival mechanism, and paying attention was the same. And in today's world where everybody's so focused on AI and like we got to adapt to technology and we got to focus and double down on technology, actually what I say to companies and to leaders is slightly different. I say we can't predict the future. There's no way of seeing what the future will be. So instead of obsessing about what the future will be, obsess on making sure your teams are ready for anything the future can throw at them. And the one battle-tested thing that's helped countless companies and leaders outperform the market and stand out, cut through the noise, build trust, and inspire action are people who use stories. So
Absolutely. Love that. Fantastic answer. What do you think people get kind of wrong about it? What do you think is the main stumbling block? What's the struggle with storytelling?
So from a general perspective of storytelling, I think people don't apply a simple structure, which I talk about in my book, and I'm very happy to share the framework with you later. That's number one. The number two is that they make the stories about themselves and they sort of get lost in their own stories. And this, I'm specifically talking about people who are trying to build personal brands or leaders within companies or organizations trying to build, inspired teams, that they sort of make the story about how great they are. And they sort of fail to see the most important part, which is, okay, well, what's in it for me as the audience member, right? And there's 7 steps to making impactful stories. Happy to share through that as well.
Well, on that note, I do remember seeing you recently posting about your story is about you, but it's not for you. Yeah. So would you like to expand on that?
Yeah. So, obviously I try and get leaders to be more authentic and vulnerable within their organizations, teams, and with the outside world. And one of the things I try and get people to talk about more is about themselves or part of themselves, or why certain things feel personal to them. And one of the things that a lot of people say is that, well, I don't want to come across as self-centered. I don't want to come across as I want to milk my story, or I'm trying to somehow manipulate people to feel certain things, because, so it's a lot about the outward sort of focus on other people, if you want, in a way, in the sense of like, what do they think about me? Because the story's about me. And what I say to people is like, yes, your story is about you in its essence, because you're sharing something that happened to you or that you went through or that you resonate with or whatever it is. But if you understand the power of storytelling, the way that I love to teach, it's actually the most impactful way to share a story is when you make it about the audience. So it's about you, but it's not for you, because it's a gift for your audience. So really a story is a vehicle for a message you're trying to land. It's a bridge.
And I love how the bridge, exactly as you say, that it sort of pulls into the middle there. The people who maybe go OTT to your previous point on like the personal brand and get lost in their own story. And then you've got the others who've got the fear of coming across self-centered. Yeah. So that sort of brings, I guess, those two audiences together there, which is converting that into what's in it for the audience.
Yeah.
So have you got any, we mentioned on practical frameworks, we will get stuck into like how to actually do live exercise on storytelling, but have you got any practical tips on converting something about you to the audience? Like, could we see real life?
Well, so I think, the easiest way to start it is to look at my impact formula, the storytelling formula. And it's called the 3 C's. And it's very simple, because if you study storytelling, or anybody listening or watching is into storytelling, then you've probably heard about the 12 steps of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, or the monomyth. You've probably heard about the 5 whys that in journalism. And there's all these amazing frameworks right out there. But one thing I noticed, especially with leaders, with business leaders, entrepreneurs, founders, is that they're quite complex, so they're a bit hard to implement in real time, especially like you're on a podcast, you're on a panel, you're on a stage, you're in a team meeting, you're at a all staff meeting or sort of a town hall type meeting, and you get asked a question and you got to pull out a story out of your sort of story bank, which I call in the Glow in the Dark, my book, I call the story bank. You got to pull it out and sort of run it through a framework. And 12 steps, 7 steps, 5 steps are kind of complex. So I came up with a 3-step framework, and I'll share it with you now. And it's called the 3 C's. So the first one is called context. That's really sort of tell me. So it's effectively give enough information that I don't have to think about
The relevance.
Yeah, like not even the relevance. Don't give me enough context so I can understand where you are, and then my mind's not wandering. And I'm going to give you an example after we do the 3C, so in real time you can see. That's just context, right? It's kind of like tell me. Second part is connect. So also take me. That's when you go into the emotional resonance, or you go into the pinnacle moment, or there's a sort of climax moment in your story. And most people kind of stop there, like, right? Most people can sort of get into the story, share sort of like the fun moment, the sad moment, the tragic moment, you know, or whatever it is. But the third part that misses is what I found observing a lot of leaders and working with leaders is the third part, which is conclusion, which is tell me. And that is land the plane. Tell me what's in it for me. Why should I listen? Why should I care? So I'll give you an example, relevant to sort of, you know, one of the first seven steps of sharing stories with impact. So it's 1991, and I'm sitting on this bus. I'm really excited because we're off to Euro Disney, and we're not going to go and see Mickey. We're actually going to go and witness Jonathan Ross recording a TV show. He's gone back to, but he used to have this sort of evening talk show, and he's going to interview Dinah Ross, right? And so because they wanted to do this big thing at Euro Disney and have an audience, they asked all the local schools, all the sort of English-speaking local kids to come and watch. And this is a dream come true, right? Because back then I want to be an actor, I want to be on TV. And so I get there and there's like 900 people in this sort of auditorium, and it's amazing. And we're seeing like how the sausage is being made, you know, cut, and like they redo a take or whatever it is. And in between takes, right, they have these women walking around with microphones sort of warming up the crowd, if you want. I don't know if you've ever been to a live recording, but they have these sort of crowd warmers. I don't know what you call them. And at one point she says, would anybody like to say a joke? Like, does anybody have a joke? And like 3 kids raise their hands, and I'm one of those kids. And I'm thinking as I go up, you know, towards the microphone, and all the other kids start sharing these jokes, like, you know, why did the chicken cross the road, or whatever it is. And I'm like, oh, I've got the joke. Like it absolutely like smashed it in the courtyard this morning, like just nailed it. Everybody was in stitches. So I'm going to say that joke. And in case you're wondering, no, I'm not going to say this joke live now, because what I will say is that it involves a parrot, Jesus, and a Coca-Cola. And I say the joke, right? And at the end of my joke, half the room goes like, oh, and the other was like, oh, like awkwardly laughing. And the woman snatches the microphone out of my hand, and she goes like, okay, thank you very much. And she leans in and she's like, don't ever say that joke again. And I was really confused, right? I was really confused because I was like, but this joke did so well in the courtyard with my mates, and somehow I've just been told never to say this joke again in public. And the important lesson I learned that day was know your audience. It's not about the story. It's not about the message. It's not even about what you're trying to say. It's about knowing who you're speaking to so you can meet them where they are.
Love that.
So that live, right? That's the 3 C's.
Yeah.
If you think about what I just said, I said of the context that it's 1991, you know, I'm in a bus, I'm excited, I'm not going to Euro Disney. Then I take it to the moment where she snatches the microphone and she kind of says, don't ever tell that story. That's the sort of climax. And then I go, what I actually learned that day in the difficult way was you got to know your audience.
You land the plane.
Yeah. And another way that you can use to say this that's quite easy is just say, and the reason why I'm telling this story is, if you get lost in your story and you're kind of going off on a rant, one way to come back is just to say, and the reason, well, you probably asking yourself why I'm sharing the story, or the reason why I'm sharing the story, and then you land.
Love that. Gets the crowd back in.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind, this is kind of very sort of business focused, entrepreneurial audience. Let's connect that. Obviously, this is applicable to everyone, but just connecting it specifically to business now, because storytelling matters not only when you're on a podcast or to kind of, you know, get the crowd engaged, but even in fundraising, like pitching, time and time again, like the data has gone to show, like the story that you tell, especially if you're early stage, like many of my listeners are, that story you tell to get the investors along that journey, get that conviction. Can you talk a little bit to the, I guess, more of like the measurable impact and the measurable impact with the storytelling in business? Yeah,
I mean, look, I'll give you a personal story, as you would probably guess by that. But the truth is, they used to have this joke at Movember. So I used to work at the Movember Foundation. I was one of the country managers, and there was this joke that we called it the Rusty effect, and it was effective when I used to go into market. So I ran Movember France, Movember Spain, Movember Belgium, and Movember Switzerland, and when I'd go into market, you'd see a sort of spike in registrations, and the reason being is I was just using story. Right, that was the only thing I was using. So I'd go out there. I had a backpack, a very questionable moustache, and sort of a story. And that's what I did. I used to share sort of the story in November and sort of my story towards that. And you would see a definite sort of link between activation communities and results. The other thing is that if you think about, actually, I'll give you a concrete example because I shared this example yesterday in the keynote I gave to 400 plus business leaders, and Wrexham AFC, right? So it's a sort of a small Welsh football club, mining town, proud, and my mum's Welsh. And so in 2021, two Hollywood actors, Canadian American, Ryan Reynolds and Ryan Mackin, I can never pronounce his surname. I'm dyslexic, and so forget about it. And they buy the club, right, for $2.5 million. Over the course of the next 4 years, the club gets back-to-back promotions, goes from Division 5 to becoming now into the Championship League. For people like me who have no idea about football, which is I don't know football, all you need to know is that they were like at the bottom of like the professional league, and now they're literally one promotion away from being in the Premier League. And now they're worth an estimated $133 million. Now, you could argue there's many things that happened, but I'll tell you what I saw from a storytelling perspective. Ryan Reynolds is a genius at taking a brand or a product that might be in a saturated market, who might be a struggling market, and turn it into one of the most valuable assets. And he does that through storytelling. He does that through brand building. And the way that they did it is that they did a documentary called Welcome to Wrexham. And they humanized the club, the supporters, and they made it all about the community. It wasn't about the Ryans. And it was all about like the club. It was all about the community, this story. And they had this vision. It was a crazy vision when they were in Division 5, which was like to turn Wrexham AFC into a Premier League club. And so this idea that this was even possible, and obviously they invested money and they got the people in and players, all this stuff. But this storytelling ability enabled them to build a franchise or like a club that's becoming a staple name and is just one promotion away from being it's completely crazy. And there's countless stories like that you've seen of brands who embrace storytelling as a way to leverage their product. And I think also people don't buy necessarily the best product, they tell the product that tells the best story.
Yeah, I love that. That makes complete sense. What I just connect that to, sticking with the entrepreneurial theme, is in the great TED Talk that you gave a number of years ago, you highlighted the disparities between the glamorous life of entrepreneurship, which I think more and more people are realizing that is not the case. And the show as well is absolutely the purpose of that, is to get behind the scenes and actually understand more of the realities. What can you kind of share with entrepreneurs to help them kind of prepare for the realities of what that journey looks like?
Yeah. So look, I'm 8 years into the journey, right? Give or take 9 years. Wait, what are you, 2025? Yes. 9 years. It'll be 9 years this year that I've been running my business. Yeah, almost a decade. That feels pretty crazy. Yeah. Which will mean I'll almost be more sort of a business owner than I have been an employee, which is interesting. Anyway. Yeah. So
it feels longer with COVID in the mix as well, I bet.
Right. Yeah. And I'll say something that might be controversial. But I actually don't think that everybody should be an entrepreneur. Right. Like this was my harsh reality that I realized. I don't think everybody is necessarily built to be an entrepreneur. And it doesn't mean that you're less than by saying that. I just want to make that very clear. There is not a superior hierarchy of if you're a founder, if you're not a founder, if you're not an entrepreneur. The reason why I say this is that I think there can be a sort of glorification of entrepreneurship online. And it's like build a business, follow your dreams. And for some people, 100%. And I think entrepreneurs and founders can solve some of the world's most meaningful problems. And we need entrepreneurs. We need business owners for sure. I also think that some people would be probably happier within a company where their values feel more aligned with the work that they're doing, where they feel the mission is compelling, where they feel that the vision is worth fighting for, and they want to help build this sort of company where someone else is perhaps founding it or leading it. I want to caveat my answer with that because I think we can be quick to think like, I want to run a business because I'll have all the freedom and I want, and I'll have all the opportunities, all the money, and it's not at all like that. You know this. Anybody who's spent enough time with people who've built businesses from, single digits to 8 figures, such as yourself and me, for my podcast, The Unconventionalist, I've interviewed like hundreds of people through that, is that you realize that you've got to have the ability to sustain the highs and the lows. It's going to take a toll on your mental health, like big time. There's studies I talk about in my TEDx talk, the study of Dr. Freeman, who sort of studied entrepreneur and the link with mental health. And there's like a higher probability of you having like depression, anxiety, and like all this stuff. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing is if you're committed to it and you've got an idea, you want to do it, it's like have the grace to recognize that it's not going to be easy all the time, and don't try your best and not tie your sense of self-worth to the outcome of your startup or your company or your business. It's really important, really hard to do in life, but so important if you can get this, because it's sort of like you're trying to create this thing. It's an extension of who you are, but it's not who you are. And we can get so tied up that if I don't make my numbers, that means I'm being rejected. If I ask for a sales, I'm the one who's being rejected. So I'll say to people to try and really dissociate yourself, even if you're building a personal brand, right? Which is so I keep in mind that I spent about a decade as an employee, and I went through different variations of positions, but, as a manager. And I was generating about 6 million euros of revenue for a business I was working with. I raised 2.8 million euros for Men's Health through Movember. So I was a pretty high performer when it came down to what I was doing. I was really good at it. And I thought that when I would transition to running my own business, it'd be easy. I'd be like, oh, all the mistakes I saw my leaders make, all the stuff that I was judging and criticizing, and I would never do that, then I would be like, of course, I'm a unicorn. I'll be different. And boy, was I wrong, right? Like when it started, I was like, all this sort of weird stuff that was coming up around, I don't want to pitch to you. I don't want to say a number because it feels weird and awkward and I'm not quite sure. And all this weird stuff started mixing up. And I realized like, oh, it's because I'm internalizing this business. Like this is an extension of me. So therefore, if you reject my business, you're rejecting me. And so I would say to people, just try and find a way to say, this is a product. It's a service. It's not you, even today, right? So my product is a keynote. So I effectively go into companies or conferences and I deliver a sort of inspiring keynote. It's me because I'm performing, but it's the product. People don't buy me necessarily, right? Like I'm not a Simon Sinek or Brené Brown yet, whatever the thing is.
Yes.
But what I do is I'll solve a problem. And so what I have to remember is like, if someone doesn't pick me for their event or someone doesn't reply yes to a pitch, it's just that I didn't do a good enough job to express the value that I could bring, or it just wasn't right for them. But it doesn't mean I'm inadequate. It doesn't mean that I'm not enough. It doesn't mean that I'm not lovable. And I know it sounds weird to say this, but I think it's an important conversation that a lot of people aren't having.
Yeah.
And the final point I make is you've got to find a community of people who will be real with you and will tell you like, if it's time to stop, it's time to stop. Or if it's time like push,
yeah.
or if it's time to rest, just rest. Sometimes just hear someone saying, hey, it sounds like you've been on the road a lot. Like I've been right now. You can hear like I'm run down at the moment. Maybe like take a break. Maybe you don't need to say yes at every gig you're going to get. Maybe like some of them you can sort of say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I'll come back next year. So have a community that can have your back, because I really think that the way that you thrive is by making sure that you surround yourself in a really sort of positive is a weird one, but like a sort of optimal environment. And I'm not just talking about like your flat or the car or the bike that you ride. I'm talking about the people you surround yourself and people who genuinely want you to succeed. And I've seen this, and you've seen this, where we are sometimes in a community and it almost feels like they say that's great, but it's not genuine. And it's almost like you feel bad to share some of the wins that you've had, or maybe you've shared, and shout out to Mic Drop community members watching this, hopefully. I think that's an amazing community, for example, of speakers who are actively trying to help each other out and share each other. And look, I'll say this, and I'm not proud to say this. I think, a lot of people think that I'm naturally generous and able to connect people and give and all this stuff. I've had to learn it because I think I was wired as a kid because of the quote unquote trauma I went through as a kid, that I was really on my own, that I had to make sure that I did everything I needed to do in order to survive and thrive. When I've come to realize that actually we do much better by helping each other out. And that if you succeed, then that I succeed. It's like almost Ubuntu sort of mentality of like, I win when you win.
Yeah. A mutual friend of ours actually introduced me to the concept of the go-giver. We're all familiar with like being a go-getter.
Yeah.
Actually being a go-giver.
Yeah.
And that value that you get, exactly to your point there, on helping others.
Yeah.
It's not, you're not giving away anything of your own.
No.
You stand to gain more than anything.
Yeah, and it's the opposite of like a scarcity mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
I've really had to, and I'm trying to do this with my kids, like the growth mindset, this kind of idea. Like they'll say like, oh, why don't I have the same amount? And I'm always going, if you spend your time comparing yourself, you spend your time, you're never going to be content with what you have, right? And like, Sophie Devonshire, who I need to give a shout out to, she's amazing at this, right? She's the CEO of the Marketing Society. And she's so good at connecting. She's like a super connector, right? She's the one who connected me to my publisher. She's the one who connected me to a speaking agency who booked me and stuff. So she is always really out there, actively connecting, and it inspires me to do the same. So when I can connect people, when I can get people into gigs and stuff, I love doing it.
It's such a productive ripple effect, isn't it? Because it does make you feel like you want to do the same. You want to pass it on, pay it forward. You kind of brush past trauma as a kid. Is that something you're okay to talk about? I'm just intrigued what that was about.
No, so it's no secret, but so I'm dyslexic. As I like to say, I'm a proud dyslexic thinker with an ADHD powered brain. It's kind of like the way that I.
Great.
I know this now, but back then, this is in the early, the 80s, 90s, and it wasn't really a thing, especially in France. It's archaic educational system. And so I was...
What's the France relevance, sorry?
Oh, because in France, it's like, even still to this day, I would say it's about 5 to 10 years backwards compared to the US and UK when it comes down to neurodiversity.
And you grew up there, did you?
Yeah, I grew up. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was born and raised in France. Thus, the name Leruste. I often say when I'm on stage, I'm like, I'm half British, half French. Nobody's perfect. It gets you a few laughs in the UK. I said the same joke in France. It bombs, right? And I realized that, self-deprecating humor is not a French thing. So yeah, I was born and raised in France. And look, I was a really sort of creative, active, probably bouncing off the walls. I was probably a real pain, let's be honest, as a kid, and the teacher must have been a nightmare. But because I couldn't read out loud, I couldn't spell, I couldn't do basic maths, I was basically bullied on almost daily, if not weekly basis by some of my French school teachers. So in 2 pivotal years, when I was like 5 to 6 or 6 to 7 and then 8 to 9 or something like that. And it left a lot of scars, right? It left a lot of scars because if you're constantly being reminded that you're inadequate, that you're just stupid, that you'll just amount to nothing, you sort of internalize that. And I was then held back a year when I was maybe about 11, something like that, 11 or 12 was held back. And eventually I was kicked out of conventional education. I was 16 and I went into this more sort of, in theory, supposed to be like more professional route where you're not academically sort of gifted normally if you go to these sort of things. And it's looked down upon a lot in France, at least back then. But through, a series of events, I managed to get into university and, my life turned out to be, great. And I'm really grateful for my life. But I still, to this day, it's really interesting. So, for example, when I was doing my slides for yesterday's keynote, I originally had like 460 slides, right? For a 45-minute keynote. Yeah. Then I break it down to 220 slides.
What?
So I went on stage, I said 220 slides for 45 minutes. And what's interesting is that I think part of it is driven by the fact that I still, to this day, feel like people will know that I'm stupid or that I'm inadequate. And so I need to make sure I put up smoke and mirrors. Yeah. So if I boom, 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 if I do all this really smart stuff, quotes and I can hide. And it's taken me a lot of time to sort of unpack that and to go, actually, I'm a creative. I'm just someone who's a creative who happens to operate in a business world. And I love marketing and leadership and impact, all that stuff. But it's that sort of childhood wound that still, sort of drives the train at times and drive the car, which I'm still working through.
Yeah.
And thus the whole idea of, I was so driven when I was a kid. I was so committed internally. I was convinced I'd be an actor. I was just convinced, right? Same. Yeah, because all the teachers were sort of going, you're not going to amount to whatever. And thank God I had the Anglophone section there who sort of was a beacon of hope because we had 6 or 7 hours of English a week. And then I was on set of a TV show called The Count of Monte Cristo with Gérard Depardieu. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the beginning of everything, right? Because I'd been through auditions and I wasn't one of the last kids to get picked for a film with Jane Austen, with Jane Eyre, John Austen, whatever the film was. And they said, oh, sorry you didn't get it. It was up to you and this other kid. He looked more like the main actor. I don't know if it was Ewan McGregor or someone like that. And then, but we'll give, there's this extra piece if you want, this TV show. I was like, yeah, great, I'll do it. So I'm on set and I'm just in costume. They perm my hair, whatever it was. There was little chairs and hot chocolates and sandwiches. It was just the best, right? And trailers. And I'm standing there. This guy, in my mind, he's like 67. He must have been 24, right? I'm a kid. So but honestly, he must have been actually quite young. But in my mind, he's like this really old guy. And he's like, what are you doing here? And I remember he had this long hair and he was juggling or some weird stuff. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to become an actor. I'm going to become the next Brad Pitt, the next Tom Cruise, just so you know. And he's like, right, yeah, no, that's not happening. 1 in a million make it. You'll be waiting tables for the whole life. Look at us. There was all these guys sort of waiting around. This is what we do just to get a paycheck. It's. And I just remember as a kid just going, oh my God, that sounds awful. I definitely don't want that,
A reality check.
Yeah, the reality check. And so I was like, well, I better, and so when it came down to studying, university, I studied business, really, as I thought it was a backup plan.
Yeah.
I'm going to study business, and if I'm going to go into acting, and if acting doesn't work out, I'll go to business.
And I'm glad obviously you're doing incredibly well now. So obviously happy ending, so to speak. Everything's worked out really well. But listening to your story there, I can't help but wonder what a dangerous recipe that is going into the world of acting with already these wounds from childhood and already having low self-esteem, trouble with your self-worth, understandably, through the bullying. And then obviously, going into something like acting is just going to amplify that 10,000 times. So, you never know.
Yeah.
Things maybe work out for a reason.
But I get to perform that. I mean, honestly,
Exactly.
like I was thinking about this yesterday. The weird thing is, my wife can't understand this, right? So I sent her a picture yesterday. So, I don't know when this is coming out, but people can scroll back on my LinkedIn feed and they'll see a picture of me taking a selfie on stage with 450 people in the background.
Yeah.
And I walked into the room, right, and there's like this incredible production. We're talking like, I haven't seen anything like this in the UK. Like these LED screens all around and music and like this huge ballroom, which I think could probably hold 1,000 people, right? And I get in there, I send the picture, I'm like, look how awesome this is. It's amazing. I'm always like, not a lot of people would see that and get excited, and count the minutes till you get on stage. So when I walked on stage yesterday, and I'm on that stage, I'm home. It's so weird to explain this, but like I am home. I get on that stage, I feel super comfortable. It's like if I'm talking to you right now, but I just have 450 people in front of me. And someone asked actually in the Q&A, they say, how do you find the difference between sharing a story to one person versus a group? And I was like, well, obviously I'm not as animated if I'm just with the one-to-one, because it'd be so weird if I'm like walking around like, and what you really need to do as a leader, you know what I mean? So that is probably the thing. But otherwise, from an energy level, I'm as connected, as inspired, and as passionate about this message as I would be if I'm talking to you on a podcast, on a one-to-one over a coffee. Well, I drink tea, but on a stage.
Yeah, love that. Well, I think if anyone gets that, I definitely do, Mark, but I appreciate that we are both in the very tiny minority. I know with Alex Merry, we talked about how the very vast majority of people, it's like 97% or something, would literally rather die than go and like speak on stage. Yeah. So we're a pair of weirdos, you and I, but hopefully our audience can really take something away from what we're talking about. What I want to connect this back to, and I'm really glad that the story has kind of taken this direction, because I did want to circle back to your points around self-worth in entrepreneurship, because there was such a great answer you gave before on like preparing people for the realities of entrepreneur. Not everyone should be an entrepreneur. I do agree with you on that. So there's a couple of things. So one is with comparisonitis and social media. There's a couple of tension points, because you've got the nature of the world that we live in today in 2025, but also in business, and especially if you are bootstrapped or you're really trying to make kind of each penny count, personal brand, at least, for me, I've definitely found that has been one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful way to build a business without the media budget and paying the Zuck tax, which I talk about as well. Can you talk to the mental health side of that, given like your previous role at Movember? Quick one, so sorry to interrupt. I'm sure that you are on the edge of your seat listening to this interview, at least I hope so. I'm so aware of all the other podcasts that are already out there, so the fact that you've decided to tune in and listen to this one is not lost on me. If you can just go that one step further and hit that follow or subscribe button, doesn't cost a thing, takes 2 seconds. Now is your chance to do that. It means so much. Really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the interview. Can you talk to the mental health side of that, given like your previous role at Movember, your own personal journey with not tying it to your business, your self-worth, and just kind of that avoiding that comparisonitis in social media?
It's really hard. Like, I'm just going to say this straight up. I'm not going to come here and think that I've got it all figured out. It's really hard. So everyone's going to have their own stuff that sort of they peg their sense of success, right? So the narrative that I had growing up was money equals success, right? So, no fault of her own, but for example, my mum might be talking about, so-and-so, look at, like, they've got this big house, look at, they've got a great job, loads of money. There was always this narrative of like money equals success. So for me, like the amount of my bank account equals my amount of worth. And it is so messed up because it's so ridiculous. I know people who are millionaires, if not billionaires, and they will tell you, trust me when I say this, money gives you ease and it gives you loads of things, but it will not bring you happiness, that sense that you're feeling in your heart that if you would get like $1 million or whatever it is in the bank, that you're going to feel different. You're not, right? And I've seen this my whole life, by the way. I've been very fortunate in the sense that, I landed a TEDx talk. It's had over 1.3 million views. My podcast won an award for best podcasting interview at the Business for Podcast Awards. My book, Glow in the Dark, won the best self-development business book at the Business Book Awards. And I could go on, right? I thought that I would feel different when these accolades happened. Hey, spoiler alert, doesn't change a thing, right? It's great on that day, but then the next day you're like, right, shit, the hole's still there.
Back to normal.
Yeah, that nagging feeling's still there. So we hear about it all the time. We know this. the implementation is the hard part, right? Which is this idea of try and know that just you being alive is enough, right? And like the way that you show up with your friends and your family matter more. Because one of my TEDx talk, I think one of the reasons why it resonated with people is that I sort of, and I was very scared, by the way, to share this part of the story online because I thought my business would tank. I thought that would be career suicide, effectively, because I was going to talk about how I struggled, how I didn't know how I was going to pay my mortgage, how I was on the floor crying one morning, going like, what am I doing? I thought this was going to be easy. But I think it's about really giving yourself the grace of understanding that it's going to be hard, and you've got to know the foundations that you need to put in place in order to function, just operate at a functional level if you want. So, for example, for me, I know that if I eat a bunch of junk food, if I don't exercise, if I don't hydrate, if I don't sleep well, if I'm on social media doom scrolling, I'm screwed. Like, forget it. My mental health, I've got ADHD, and so I try and manage it as much as I can. And so find your baseline of some things that you can do. The other thing, which is I think is really, really hard, is to try and limit your usage of social media. And I know we all know this, we all say this, and Alexander Bell's an amazing speaker on this about the tech rules and how we need to make sure that we rule tech and before tech rules us. But it's a really important aspect, I think, of society, especially now, right? Like, think about it. I heard someone on Instagram talk about this. Chatbots are going to redefine the relationship that our kids have with friends. The same way that we didn't pay attention to social media, how it would affect the brain of teenagers and young kids. We're going to go through this with chatbots now, because imagine kids interacting with chatbots. They have a friend on demand all the time, answering all their questions, being there whenever they need. They don't understand anything about limitations, or why would they need to go make out friends on the outside world when they've got this bot right here? So all these things that, as parents or non-parents, we need to be aware of. And then again, I try and observe people. I look around who do sort of things. So I'm fortunate in the way that, because I'm a parent, I am so aware of the finite amount of time that we have on this planet, especially with people that we love. I see my kids grow before my eyes, and I feel like it's sand slipping through my hands. And I have a chart in my gym, my home gym, that people find really weird. Like my wife and my friends just find it really anxiety driven, but it really helps me. It's effectively a sort of a big poster, right? And it has 52 weeks per line, and it has about 90 lines going down, right? And it's my life in dots. And every week on Sunday, I fill it with a black marker, and it reminds me of how did I spend my week? How did I spend my time? Who did I connect with? And when I get all this sort of stress and angst about, we talked about this, like in the speaking world, there are moments of like, well, I had a good ride. So, no gigs are coming in, no leads are coming in. And then it just goes crazy, right? And it's this circle. So for me, it's just to remember that. And I never would have said this before. I really wouldn't. I would have been like, I was all about business and success and all this stuff. And I think I've seen enough entrepreneurs. Like, the one that really threw me off actually was Tony Hsieh, the founder of Zappos. His book Delivering Happiness is one of the like an amazing book. And this guy, and then he died, and found out he had all this sort of mental health problems and struggled with a lot of stuff. And you hear these stories over and over again of these quote unquote air quote, and I'm doing air quotes for people just listening to this, who are successful on the outside but deeply broken on the inside. And so I really would love for people to lean more into mental health support, finding community, and exercise. I mean, I'll shut up because I'm going on a rant, but the one thing at Movember that doctors all agreed on, right? You couldn't, like, do tomatoes help prevent prostate cancer or not? Like, everyone's debating this, whatever. But the one thing that every doctor said, exercise is the best medicine for your mental health. It just is. Like, the oxytocin that you'll release, the hormones that you're creating as I'm exercising. Like, I'm a different human being when I go to the gym, just so we're clear. I'm usually a horrible human being when I'm outside of the gym. I'm grumpy, and I just feel like a tiger in a cage. So just exercise. It's the answer.
No, I love it. I love that so much. Like, the fundamentals, just getting those fundamentals right. Sleep, nutrition, all the good stuff.
And it's not always going to be like this. I need to say this. I'm victim of this, where I'm like, if I don't have my morning routine, Steph, I just can't do it. Forget it. Like, I don't have my sort of like 10-minute calm meditation app on. I can't do my journaling. Where's my green tea? All that. No. So again, I heard someone say this. It was love is like, I loved it. It said, sometimes it says you gotta lower your ceiling and raise your floor, something like that. I love that. It's like, if you've only got time to just focus on water today, Robbie Thompson taught me this, if all you can do today is just hydrate enough, you just do that. That's enough.
Make it easy.
Make it easy.
Yeah.
Do whatever you can, instead of like, oh, well, I punctured a wheel, so I might as well just puncture all wheels.
Right. I've got a few more questions before we wrap here. So one is, I'm having these like I personally haven't slept enough, so I keep having these like brain fart moments. So this is definitely going to be cut, as we're going to have to cut. So I apologize to my editor, because there's so much I want to dive into. What was I going to say?
Okay.
All right. Couple more questions on the social media front before we wrap here. One is just sticking with kind of personal branding and business and stuff as well, whether you are a keynote speaker or an entrepreneur or you're the founder of a SaaS business, whatever it may be. We were just talking before we hit record about you using LinkedIn and really just focusing on one channel and just doubling down on that.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about how it can be such a time suck, not just the content creation. You were saying you were like 2 hours on a post this morning, very understandable, let alone all the commenting, the engaging and everything else. So totally with you on all those fundamentals, on like taking care of yourself. Don't get sucked into that. Too much social media is just not going to do anyone any good. But keeping it on the business benefits here as well, where it's like, we know the power of personal brand. We know, I guess the question here is like, what advice could you give when you have that temptation to be like, if I just post a bit more, if I do a bit more commenting, if I do another channel, like there's no ceiling to any of that.
Well, I'll go back to my mate, Daniel Priestley, who says ABS, anything but sales. I think it's really interesting because I think social media can be a procrastination thing we're avoiding to do, which is actually having conversations with potential customers, generating leads, converting leads and growing our business. I think social media should be part of your strategy, but it shouldn't be the only strategy, if that makes sense. And so I know that sometimes you can think like, oh, I just need to, if only I was posting daily. Like I've posted daily for over 6 months on LinkedIn, right? And I didn't, I get a bit more audience, but I didn't necessarily gain more traction. And, someone posted, I wrote this sort of reflection of 1 year of posting regularly on LinkedIn, what lessons I learned. And the comment thread are amazing. If you can go back and find that post, the comments are just filled with like tips and insights from like these really helpful sort of LinkedIn members. And one of the things I learned is that actually it's also about being strategic. So, when we talk about business, one of the things I think is not being spoken to about, and, I've got to give credit, I think it was Alex Hormozi who kind of spoke about this. And then Eleanor, who also mentioned this, but there are 3 things that I think are really spoken about and aren't celebrated enough, especially as us creatives, like, oh, no, one of them is impulse control. So there are always going to be shiny objects, this new platform, this new technique. Have you tried this carousel? Have you tried this lives, newsletters, webinars? There's always new things, new channels. And so you think that is the magic one. That is the magic pill that's missing, right? So impulse control is about saying, no, I'm going to commit for the next 12 months, which is what I've done. I want to get out of LinkedIn because I'm like, I should be on YouTube, which I'm going to be transitioning to YouTube at some point soon. But I've committed. So right now my strategy is impulse control. Second one is operational discipline. Operational discipline is the ability to go like, I am executing on the thing I'm going to do, and just having that ability to do. And the third one is ruthless prioritization. As someone, again, with my little spicy brain, it's really hard. All those 3 things are pivotal to business. And they're really hard, especially if you're a creative one-person band, right? And so there are a few things you can do. You can leverage AI to help you be basically your sort of chief operating officer, or you can find someone, a team member that you can sort of bring on, whether part-time or full-time, to help you really give those strong foundations. That's a really important point I want to say, because we can talk about social media tactics and stuff that works, all this stuff, but if you need to understand the fundamentals, that social media is part of your strategy, it's not the only one. I am connecting with people virtually. I'll have like, I don't do a lot at the moment because I'm on the road a lot and I'm traveling a lot for work, but I'll try and have a random catch up on a Zoom, and I don't know where it's going to lead, right? I mean, case in point, we're having this conversation today. We actually met up and we connected on Zoom after like being part of Mic Drop. I also go and make sure I reach out to my previous contact, my previous clients. I said, do you know anybody who might be looking for a speaker at an event coming up? Because they'll know. So people, I think.
Are you quite regimented with that? Sorry.
No, I'm not. Like, I have a structured CRM pipeline, which is it's kind of like lead in, contact made, meeting scheduled, proposal sent, negotiation, one lost. That's my pipeline, right? And so I move contacts throughout this pipeline, and I checked my CRM system, not as much as I should do, but that's kind of what reminds me. So when I get, and also little tactics, Alex Bell will be much better at this, but he, things like delete your, I don't know, was it you? No, who was it? Did you delete your LinkedIn on Fridays? Someone else. Yeah. Anyway, someone else in the group community deletes their LinkedIn app on Friday night and reinstalls it on the Monday. I forgot what it was.
That's funny.
So things like that, things like,
take back the control.
Yeah. I mean, we again, I don't want to talk too much about parenting and stuff, but we're seeing now there's a battle, right? There's a battle happening with our kids around screens. And so schools now, some schools have introduced iPads and stuff in schools, but other schools like in Denmark and in Spain are banning them because of the impact it has on the brain. And we had a very conscious commitment very early on that we just wouldn't expose our kids to their screens. They can watch cartoons once in a while, watch a film once in a while, but it's not part of their conscious sort of belief that this is something they could do. So they are some of the most creative kids you'll see when they'll play and they'll create games and all this stuff. And my wife, who did she's got a neuroscience background at Oxford, did a master's there. She's got a psychology background and from the American University of Paris, and did a childhood childhood something psychology. Anyway, so that's her stuff, right? And she's always been the one that's been much more firm than me. Just like, no, this will impact their brains. And the reason why I'm saying this is that you can see there is no way you can win a battle against an iPad.
Exactly.
If you have the choice between creative free play, being bored, or getting on an iPad, you will always try. Now, I'm saying this as someone who also gets why, like, especially during COVID, I'm going to meetings and calls. Well, you're going to watch a few more cartoons than you would normally do. You're at a restaurant, you want to have a meal with your partner. Yeah, you're going to get the phone or iPhone. Like, I get why. It's not at all coming from a place of judgment. It's just coming from a place of, we need to recognize that we're coming with a battle. And the reason why I'm saying this, it's like if you're an alcoholic and you're keeping alcohol at home, the battle is 10 times harder.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have certain coping mechanisms in place to make sure you're not overusing social media, such as deleting apps on your phone that you could just be doing on your computer once or twice a day, right? It's going to be really hard because you're fighting against an army of people whose sole purpose is to grab your attention and to keep you on there as long as they can.
Exactly. They're literally such powerful companies.
Yeah. And you're not going to win. You're just not going to win. As much like I've got willpower, ain't happening.
Yeah. Linked to that, my quick penultimate question to sweep in there is actually a question from one of our listeners who is also a parent. So while we are on that topic, let's just spend a bit more time on that. They were asking, what can you speak to, how did she phrase it? It was something around kind of like, truth is not as attractive with social media and some of the leadership these days. And her question was around how can we, I guess it's similar to that temptation, falling into those traps, whether it is social media or buying into certain leaders who are spinning certain stories. The truth today in 2025 is
a loose concept.
Loose concept. Thank you. Exactly.
Yeah, I get it. 100%. I think we're in an age of, I think I wrote about this and definitely talked about this, that I had this thought one day. I woke up, I was like, oh, one day our kids will ask, like, did you used to have real actors? Like, did you actually have humans used to act? That was a thing, Now we have like these sort of AI agents, but like actors, AI actors, on film. I
literally watched that Black Mirror episode last night.
Oh, really? Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I didn't know that was it. But it's like there's a part of me that's both fascinated and terrified, right? I'm thinking about, for example, Alex Hammond. What's his name? I forgot his name. The guy who did the Free Solo documentary. If you haven't seen it, he climbed El Capitan. It's in Yosemite. I've seen it in real, so I can tell you it is insanely high, and he climbed it without any rope or any safety equipment. If you haven't seen the documentary, see it. It's one of the most amazing human feats. So I see that and I'm like, that's amazing. But what happens if we put a prompt, make someone climb up this facade without any rope, and we see it? Will it impact our then appreciation of the human ability to do it? So there's this line being blurred between, and it's great, like, for example, from Imagine, like Disney. Disney said, if you can dream it, you can build it, you can make it, whatever. I don't think he ever imagined that is so true now. Like, I can think about something. I had a friend, right? She wanted to create a jewelry line or something like that. I'm like, describe me what the jewelry you want to do. I put the prompt in. I show her the drawing. She's like, oh my God, that's insane. I'm like, yeah, like we're coming into a world where talent in a way that we used to think is changing, truth in the way that we're changing. I think obviously, this is completely apolitical in terms of an observation, but the way that Donald Trump has managed to run his campaign, the way that Brexit managed to run his campaign, it became a thing where people said, but it's not true. But that doesn't matter. This wasn't a battle for truth.
Exactly.
It just wasn't. It was about who's got the best story.
Yeah, exactly.
And best stories aren't necessarily the most ethical. You know what I mean? Like there's sometimes, So I'll go back because we're in the parenting conversation. One of the common conversations we have around our table is, but so-and-so get to do this, right? Like, for example, I don't know, so-and-so are allowed to have X amount of screen or get to do this or whatever it is. And the line I always say to my kids is, that's great for them, but we have different ways of doing, and everybody gets to do their own thing. We focus on how our family operates. You're always going to navigate in a world where people do things differently. It's not about judging. It's just about respecting what they're doing, but we focus on us. And for me, for leaders listening to this, or entrepreneurs business, like you might be tempted to fall into if it's winning, why wouldn't I do it?
Exactly.
Well, be on the right side of history.
Yeah.
Is what I would say. Just like do what feels right to you. Be in your integrity. So, if you want to be honest about something, be honest about something. If you don't want to lie or build false narratives, then don't do that, right? You don't have to, because winning at all costs for me comes at a cost. And that cost is our integrity. And I want to sleep well at night.
Love that, Mark. My final traditional closing question: what's one particular tragedy that's taught you an unforgettable lesson?
The two come to mind. The short one is, when I was younger, someone we knew, it wasn't a friend, but someone we knew from our sort of age group, took his own life when we were about 15 or 14. I can't remember. We were quite young. It was, it was a really new concept back then. It was not like today mental health is being spoken to. And shortly around that, one of my brother's best friends took his life in a pretty brutal way. Oh, no. And, so my dad, I remember we sat us down and we were all outside. I think they were like my brother and his mates were like outside mourning, sort of like candles, and my dad was there. And I remember he said something that stayed with me forever. He said, the two things he said. One of them is that he said, you will never understand why someone takes that, because it is the most, how do you say it? Especially it was in French, but it's like, it's the most, and I put air quote, like unnatural thing to do as human beings, because we will, if you throw a baby in the water, they will try and survive. Yeah. They will naturally try and hit.
Finds a way. They
will try. Like, most like natural, you will try and fight. So to end your life means that you override a human basic instinct that is no longer in the world of being rational. And it's one of the biggest tragedies, right? So that was the first. The second thing he said, taking your life, suicide, is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And that line has stayed with me. This idea that the reason why it's a tragedy is that it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I think in a way that shaped me, I guess, sort of trying to understand when I'm around people who are struggling with their mental health, and that comes up. And then the second really quick one is,
I think just like, if you don't mind, just jumping in, like linking with the entrepreneurial highs and lows as well. Well, I think we also touched on like those fundamentals, and having been there myself personally, where you just haven't had enough sleep, you haven't had good food, and you can't see the wood for the tree sometimes, and then you're kind of like, you get some bad news and someone lets you down, and it's kind of like, oh my God, one thing after another. It does, when you're in the moment, it does feel to that great line of permanent solution to a temporary problem. Yeah. I think that we, at least just only speaking for myself here, is like, I think that I can sometimes forget the perspective because you're in the moment and you're kind of like head down, you're down in the dumps. You're like, wow, this is so shit. And then kind of, I guess that speaks to also the great stuff you were saying about the community as well, and having someone else to like just lift your head back and just be like, it's not that deep, or just go and touch some grass, or this too shall pass. Yeah,
I mean, look, I think one of the big trends at the moment are community. I mean, I don't live in London anymore, right? And apologies for my nasal sound. It's like getting unreal. I'm like no longer be able to breathe in a second.
It is high pollen count today. No worries.
One of the things I've noticed walking around London yesterday are run clubs.
Yeah,
it's insane. Like I was on Oxford Street area, and like from Gymshark and like Acid, and like all of them were all. And I was like, that makes sense. in a world where we feel most disconnected, where AI and technology is going to take over, like community building, going back to what the thing we've lost through religion that used to want serve its purpose. And I just want to speak quickly to what you just said. I learned this from Tim Ferriss. Have you ever heard of the acronym HALT?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. So if you're feeling like that, HALT is, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Am I hungry? Eat something. Am I angry? Go and exercise. Am I lonely? Go and meet a friend. Am I tired? Have a nap. I mean, it sounds so stupid and simple, but it's worked so many times. I feel like exactly what you said.
Yeah.
You know, I'm ready to give it up. And I go, halt. And I go, I'm tired. Yeah. Well, I really need to get rid of my pent-up aggression or whatever it is. Yeah.
And then the second.
Yeah, sorry. The second one is, well, it's a weird one, but I think it's very much linked to what I do, right? So it's sort of, it's 2009 and I go through a really bad breakup. Effectively, I found out that my girlfriend's cheating on me. And look, I'm no saint. I've cheated on girlfriends. I don't want to come across as someone who's like a higher, higher being, and I'm not. I found out it's just like this horrible sort of moment. You know, I break up with her. She's a colleague, and makes things very difficult. So I kind of quit the job. I leave. I go back and live in my parents' house. My grandfather gets diagnosed with terminal cancer. Just a lot of stuff. And he died. A lot of things happens, right? And I'm staying at my parents' house, which I'm very grateful for. But it was very difficult because I was like this on a trajectory, and my career was doing well. All this stuff. And I was struggling to get up in the morning. I was struggling to connect with people. Like, I'm a social being. I'm outside. I'm outspoken. I'm extrovert, all this stuff. I just was kind of recluse and a lot. And I think one morning, it was probably 2:00 in the afternoon. I was still in bed or something. And like my mum walked in and I told her that I thought I was depressed. And she was like, oh my God, don't tell anybody. You're never going to get a job or whatever. And it really like scared me. This moment of like, oh, I can't talk about the fact that I have depression because I might not be loved, I might not be accepted, I might not get a job. And she was doing her best to protect me. And we've spoken about this since. And it's in my book, Glow in the Dark, this story. And I really appreciate for what she was trying to do. And so fast forward to being in Paris for the Movember Foundation, where I'm launching Movember France. And I talk about the Movember Foundation, the amazing work, the research, the groundbreaking stuff they're doing, the awareness, the funds, all this stuff. And there's a journalist in the room and she effectively says, but why did you want to launch Movember France, right? Like, you had a job and you quit. Like, why do you want to do Movember France? And I remember being at this crossroad of deciding, like, do I just say the vanilla answer? Because it's a great foundation and I think men should look silly with moustaches to do a good cause, whatever. Or do I say, because I went through a really tough time, and when I was going through this tough time, I discovered Movember. It gave me a sense of meaning, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of community, a set of values. It got me out of bed, got me creative, got me raising money, and I really loved it. And I just wish there were more people talking about this. It wasn't like today. Mental health is way more spoken about than, 15, 20 years ago, whatever. And I thought that the world was going to open up beneath me and I was going to get swallowed, or at best get thrown pints at me or like tomatoes, and it was going to be like, again, the end of my launch of Movember. And instead of disconnection, what I got was connection. And that was for me the biggest surprise, because this guy, Matt, came up to me at the end. He was like, I just want to say thanks for, tonight, but especially thank you for sharing your story, because I've never seen another guy openly share your story like that. And I've been also going through some stuff. And I just want you to know that I'm going to take part in Movember and I'll get my colleagues to join in. And that was the penny drop moment for me. And I think that's the opening story of my book. And, we went off to win to raise 2.8 million euros for Men's Health. We got 110,000 people to sign up. And my team and I won an award pretty much every year. And it taught me that the story that will change your life isn't the story that you hear, it's the story that you'll share. And if you want to transform your business and change your life, learn how to share your story, your personal story in a powerful way.
Mark, love how we've come all the way full circle. This is a perfect way to wrap this episode, all the way coming back to this power of storytelling and how it might be about you, but it's actually for other people. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been such a pleasure. The time has flown. Great to hear your incredible stories. I'm sucked in, engrossed, enthralled, as I'm sure all our listeners are as well. And lots of practical tips for our entrepreneurs as well. So
thanks so much for having me, Steve.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening. Really hope you've enjoyed this. You know what to do. If you did, hit that subscribe button and we will see you next week.